What if I told you that right now, somewhere in the world, a billionaire's daughter is scrubbing floors in complete silence, while hiding a secret so devastating it could destroy everything you think you know about power, money, and family? This isn't just another rags to riches story. This is something far more sinister, something that will make you question everything. Meet Sarah Chen to the world. She's just another invisible cleaning lady, mopping floors and emptying trash cans. But what nobody knows is that she's the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire. Her parents, they're among the most powerful people on the planet. So why is she living like this? Why is she pretending to be poor? And what is she really looking for as she moves through those hallways late at night? The answer will absolutely shock you. Because what Sarah discovered about her family, it's not just illegal. It's not just immoral. It's something so dark, so twisted, that it's been haunting innocent people for decades. Before we dive into this incredible true story, make sure to hit that like button if you're ready to have your mind blown. And don't forget to subscribe because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Turn on notifications too, because this story has twists that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Are you ready to discover what Sarah Chen is really hiding? Because once you know the truth, there's no going back. Let's begin. It was 11:47 p.m. when Sarah Chen first heard the screaming. She'd been working the night shift at St. Margaret's Memorial Hospital for exactly 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. Not that she was counting. Well, actually she was. Because, every single night, as she pushed her cleaning cart down those sterile white corridors, she was searching for something. Something that would explain why her trust fund statements showed mysterious monthly transfers of exactly $2.7 million to this very hospital. Sarah wasn't supposed to be here. At 28 years old, she should have been sipping champagne at charity galas or managing one of her family's 12 international corporations. The Chen family fortune was built on pharmaceutical innovations. They were the darlings of the medical world, praised for their humanitarian efforts in developing treatments for rare childhood diseases. But that night, as Sarah mopped the floors of the restricted wing, the wing that didn't appear on any hospital directory, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Children's voices, crying, pleading. At first she thought she was imagining it. After all, this was supposed to be the administrative wing. Nothing but offices and storage rooms. But as she moved closer to room 237B, a room that required 3 different keycards to access, the sounds became unmistakable. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, was sobbing, "Please, I want to go home, it hurts, Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped her mop handle. She'd grown up visiting hospitals with her parents, watching them cut ribbons and give speeches about their commitment to children's health. But this, this was different. These weren't the bright, cheerful pediatric wards she remembered. This was something else entirely. Through a crack in the door, she saw them, 7 children, all between the ages of 5 and 10, lying in beds connected to machines she'd never seen before. Their arms were covered in needle marks, their eyes were hollow, lifeless. And standing over them, taking notes on a clipboard, was Dr. Marcus Webb, her father's closest business partner for over 30 years. But it wasn't just Dr. Webb that made Sarah's world collapse in that moment. It was the framed photograph on his desk. A photograph of her parents shaking hands, with Dr. Webb standing in front of a sign that read, Chen Foundation Pediatric Research Initiative EST, 1995. 1995. The same year Sarah's baby sister Emma had died of a rare genetic condition. The same year her parents had suddenly become billionaires, practically overnight. The same year they'd started their humanitarian mission to help sick children around the world. As Sarah stood frozen in that hallway, watching these children suffer in silence, she began to understand the horrifying truth. Her family's fortune, their reputation, their entire empire, it was all built on a lie. A lie that had been destroying innocent lives for almost 3 decades. But here's what Sarah didn't know yet, what she couldn't have possibly imagined as she quietly backed away from that room. The children she was looking at weren't random victims. They weren't kids who had been taken from the streets or bought from desperate parents. They were children who had been specifically chosen. Children whose DNA matched a very particular profile. Children who looked exactly like Sarah and her sister Emma had looked at that age. Because the Chen family's darkest secret wasn't just about illegal medical experiments, it wasn't just about using vulnerable children as test subjects for untested drugs. It was something far more personal. Something that connected directly to Sarah's own DNA, her own medical history, and the real reason why her sister Emma had died all those years ago. As Sarah Chen walked back to her janitor's closet that night, she had no idea that she'd just discovered the first piece of a puzzle that would reveal the most shocking truth of all. She wasn't just witnessing her parents' crimes. She was looking at the evidence of her own survival. Think about it in our world today, where we trust pharmaceutical companies with our lives, where we celebrate billionaire philanthropists as heroes. How many dark secrets might be hiding behind closed doors? How many times do we see charitable foundations and medical breakthroughs without questioning what really happened in those research labs? Sarah's story forces us to ask the uncomfortable questions. What if the medicines that saved your life came at the cost of another child's suffering? What if the humanitarian heroes we celebrate are actually the villains in someone else's story? And most terrifyingly of all, what if you discovered that your entire existence was connected to crimes you never knew were being committed in your name? Because Sarah's journey into the truth was just beginning, and what she would uncover about her own identity, about why she survived when Emma didn't, about what her parents had really been doing for the past 30 years, it would change everything. But that revelation, that earth-shattering moment when all the pieces finally came together, that's still to come. Isabella Martinez had been dead for exactly 847 days when she walked into the downtown precinct and applied for a job as a night janitor. Of course, that wasn't the name on her application. To the world, she was now Maria Santos, a quiet, unremarkable woman from the suburbs who needed work to support her sick mother. But the truth was far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Because Isabella Martinez wasn't supposed to exist anymore. According to every official record, every news article, every family statement, she had died in a tragic car accident 2 years and 4 months ago. The funeral had been beautiful, hundreds of mourners, 12-foot floral arrangements, and a heartbroken family saying goodbye to their beloved daughter. But here's what nobody knew. Isabella had never been in that car. The body they'd buried belonged to her identical twin sister, Alina. And Alina hadn't died in an accident. She'd been murdered. For 847 days, Isabella had been living in the shadows, surviving on cash jobs and sleeping in different motels every night. Because the people who killed Alina thought they had killed her instead. And as long as they believed Isabella Martinez was dead, she could do something Alina never had the chance to do. She could investigate. You see, the Martinez family wasn't just wealthy, they were untouchable. Her parents, Carlos and Esperanza Martinez, owned the largest private medical transportation company in South America. They moved organs, blood supplies, and medical equipment across international borders. On paper, everything was legitimate. They saved lives. They were heroes. But Alina had discovered something that changed everything. It started 6 months before her death, when Alina noticed discrepancies in the company's shipping manifests. Organs that were supposed to go to Hospital A were ending up at Hospital B. Blood supplies meant for emergency rooms were being diverted to private clinics. At first, she thought it was just administrative errors. Then she found the second set of books. Hidden in their father's private office, Alina had discovered records showing that Martinez Medical Transport wasn't just moving donated organs and legitimate blood supplies. They were trafficking organs from living victims, people who were being kidnapped, taken to illegal operating rooms, and having their organs harvested while they were still alive. The buyers, wealthy patients who couldn't wait for the official transplant lists, people who were willing to pay millions to skip the line, no questions asked. Alina had tried to go to the police. But when you're accusing one of the most respected families in the country of running an international organ trafficking ring, you need more than just financial records. You need proof. You need witnesses. She never got the chance to find them. Now, as Isabella pushed her mop cart through the police station every night, she was looking for something specific, the case file on Alina Martinez's accident, because she knew that somewhere in those files was evidence that would prove Alina's death wasn't random. It was an execution. But what Isabella discovered was so much worse than she'd imagined. As she cleaned Detective Morrison's office on a rainy Tuesday night, she found Elena's file left open on his desk. And there, paper-clipped to the accident report, was something that made her stomach drop. A photograph of Elena's body. But it wasn't taken at the crash site. It was taken in what looked like an operating room. And Elena's body showed clear signs of surgical incisions, fresh ones, made after she was already dead. The timestamp on the photo showed it was taken 3 hours Before the accident was reported, Isabella's hands shook as she realized what she was looking at. Alina hadn't just been murdered to keep her quiet about the organ trafficking. She'd been murdered to be trafficked. Even in death, their parents had found a way to profit from their own daughter. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. As Isabella continued reading through the file, she found a DNA report that had been buried deep in the evidence folder. A report that showed something impossible. The body in the morgue, the body that had been buried as Alina Martinez, had a rare genetic marker that appeared in less than 0.01% of the population. Isabella knew that marker. She'd seen it on her own medical records her entire life. Because she and Alina weren't just identical twins. They were part of something much more sinister, something their parents had been hiding since the day they were born. The Martinez twins weren't naturally conceived. They were created, genetically engineered to be perfect organ matches for their parents' most valuable clients. Living insurance policies, walking, breathing spare parts, and Alina had discovered that they weren't the only ones. Hidden in that same file was a list of names, dozens of other twin accidents over the past 15 years. Young people from wealthy families who had died in suspicious circumstances, all of them carrying the same rare genetic markers. All of them children of families connected to the medical transport industry. As Isabella stood in that dark office, reading about victim after victim, she realized the scope of what her parents had created. This wasn't just about organ trafficking. This was about farming. Human farming. Wealthy families were creating genetically perfect children specifically to harvest their organs when needed. But here's what terrified Isabella the most, as she photographed every document with her hidden camera. There was one more name on that list. One more accident that was scheduled to happen in exactly 2 weeks. Maria Santos. Her new identity. Her current identity. Somehow, someway, her parents had figured out that Isabella was still alive, and they were planning to finish what they'd started with Alina. But Isabella had learned something in those 847 days of hiding. Something that Alina had never gotten the chance to understand. Their parents weren't the masterminds of this operation. They were just employees. The real architects of this genetic horror show were people whose names appeared on hospital boards, pharmaceutical companies, and medical research foundations around the world. People who had been quietly creating a generation of children designed to die for the benefit of their parents' generation. Think about it, in our world today, where genetic engineering is becoming more accessible, where the wealthy can afford treatments the poor can only dream of, how far would some people go to guarantee their survival? How many ethical lines would they cross if they knew they could get away with it? Isabella's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. What if some of the medical miracles we celebrate aren't miracles at all, but crimes disguised as progress? What if the organ transplants that save lives are destroying other lives in the shadows? And most chilling of all, in a world where genetic modification is becoming routine, how do we know that the children being born today aren't being designed for purposes their parents never intended? Because Isabella Martinez was about to uncover the most shocking truth of all. She and Alina weren't victims of their parents' greed, they were products of it. And the people who created them had been planning their deaths since the moment they took their first breath. The question now wasn't whether Isabella could expose her parents' crimes. The question was whether she could survive long enough to reveal the global conspiracy that had been using children like her and Alina as raw materials for decades. And with only 2 weeks left before Maria Santos was scheduled to have her own tragic accident, time was running out. Amara had been searching for her real name for 6,847 days. That's how long it had been since she was 3 years old, playing in a garden filled with jasmine flowers and golden fountains, when everything went black. Her last memory before the darkness was a woman's voice, singing a lullaby in a language she couldn't place, and the sound of men shouting in panic. Now, at 21 years old, she spent her nights mopping the marble floors of the Chen Corporation's executive offices in Manhattan. To everyone around her, she was just Amy Collins, a quiet janitor who kept her head down and never asked questions. But every night, as she cleaned those pristine hallways, she was hunting for something that had been stolen from her 18 years ago. Her identity. The people she called Mom and Dad, Margaret and Robert Collins, had given her a beautiful life. A mansion in the Hamptons, the finest private schools, and a trust fund worth $2.8 billion. They'd told her she was adopted from a war-torn country, that they'd saved her from certain death, that she should be grateful for their love and protection. The question wasn't whether Princess Zahara Al-Mansuri could reclaim her throne. The question was whether she could survive long enough to expose the global conspiracy that had been shaping world politics through stolen children for over 2 decades. And with permanent relocation scheduled for next week, Amara was running out of time to choose between saving herself and saving the world. Agent Victoria Cross had been legally dead for 427 days when she started her new job scrubbing floors at the Blackwood estate. Of course, Victoria Cross wasn't her real name either. That identity had been burned along with her CIA credentials when she'd gotten too close to something the agency didn't want her to find. Now she was Sarah Mitchell, a divorced single mother, who cleaned houses for wealthy families in the suburbs of Virginia. But the house she was cleaning wasn't just any mansion. It belonged to Catherine and David Blackwood, the couple who had raised her since she was 14 years old. The couple she had called mom and dad for over a decade. The couple who had no idea that their adopted daughter was now working as their housekeeper, gathering evidence that would destroy them both, because Victoria had discovered something that changed everything she thought she knew about her life, her family, and her identity. It started 8 months ago, during what should have been a routine investigation into international human trafficking. Victoria had been tracking a network that was moving young women across borders, when she stumbled upon financial records that made her blood run cold. The Blackwood Foundation, her parents' charitable organization, was sending monthly payments of $250,000 to shell companies in 12 different countries, companies that, according to her investigation, were fronts for illegal surrogacy operations. At first, Victoria thought it was just another case of wealthy Americans exploiting desperate women in developing countries. But as she dug deeper, she discovered something far more sinister. The Blackwood Foundation wasn't just paying for surrogacy services. They were running a baby trafficking empire that had been operating for over 20 years. The operation was devastatingly simple. They would identify wealthy couples who couldn't have children naturally, then connect them with young women in poverty-stricken countries who were willing to carry babies for money. But here's where it got dark. The women weren't just carrying babies for couples who couldn't conceive. They were carrying babies that had been specifically designed. Using genetic materials stolen from fertility clinics around the world, the Blackwood Network was creating designer babies with specific traits requested by their wealthy clients. Want a child with blue eyes and musical talent? They could make that happen. Want a child with high intelligence and athletic ability? That was available to EPA. But the most horrifying part wasn't the genetic manipulation. It was what happened to the surrogate mothers after they gave birth. Victoria had found medical records showing that 90% of the women who carried these babies died within 6 months of delivery. Officially, they died from post-pregnancy complications. In reality, they were being murdered to eliminate witnesses. The babies were then sold to wealthy couples for prices ranging from $500,000 to $2 million, depending on their genetic specifications. The buyers believed they were adopting children from legitimate surrogacy arrangements. They had no idea they were purchasing the products of murder. For months, Victoria had been building a case against the network, planning to take down the entire operation. Then she found a file that changed everything. Her own adoption paperwork. According to the documents hidden in an encrypted folder on her CIA computer, Victoria Cross hadn't been adopted through normal channels. She had been purchased from the Blackwood Foundation in 2009, when she was 14 years old. But Victoria hadn't been carried by a surrogate mother. She had been stolen. The file contained photos of a car accident in Romania from 2009. A family of 4 had died when their vehicle was forced off a mountain road. The parents and their teenage son had been killed instantly, but their 14-year-old daughter had survived. That daughter was Victoria. The real Victoria Cross had died in that accident. The girl who had been pulled from the wreckage was Anca Papescu, a Romanian orphan whose parents had been murdered by the same people who later adopted her. The Blackwood Foundation hadn't just been trafficking babies. They had been trafficking children of all ages, stealing them from families around the world and selling them to wealthy Americans who wanted to adopt. Without dealing with the legal complications of international adoption, Victoria had spent the last 8 years of her life working for the CIA, believing she was serving her country, when in reality she was serving the interests of the people who had destroyed her real family and stolen her identity. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. As Victoria continued her investigation, now working from inside the Blackwood house as their housekeeper, she found evidence of something called Project Renaissance. Hidden in David Blackwood's private office, she discovered files on over 200 children who had been trafficked through their network between 2000 and 2023. children who were now adults, children who had grown up to become politicians, business leaders, military officers, and federal agents. Children who had been specifically placed with families connected to positions of power and influence. Victoria realized she was looking at evidence of the largest infiltration operation in American history. The Blackwood Foundation hadn't just been selling babies to wealthy couples, they had been strategically placing foreign children in American families, creating a network of sleeper agents who would grow up to serve interests that had nothing to do with American democracy. But here's what made Victoria's hands shake as she read through those files. Many of the trafficked children didn't know their true origins. Like her, they believed they were legitimate adoptees who had been saved from tragic circumstances. The genius of the operation was that the children themselves were unknowing participants. They genuinely loved their adoptive families, genuinely believed in American values, and genuinely wanted to serve their country. They had no idea they were products of a system designed to infiltrate and manipulate American institutions from within. And Victoria wasn't the only one who had joined the intelligence community. According to the files, at least 30 other trafficked children had grown up to work for the CIA, FBI, NSA, and Pentagon. They were scattered throughout the government, each believing they were patriotic Americans, each unknowingly compromised by their very existence. But the most terrifying discovery came when Victoria found the activation protocols. Buried deep in the Project Renaissance files were instructions for something called Phase 2 implementation. According to the documents, on a predetermined date December 15, 2025, all of the trafficked children who had grown up to occupy positions of power would receive specific instructions that would activate their true purpose. They would be told the truth about their origins, shown evidence of their adoptive family's crimes, and given a choice: cooperate with the people who had created them, or watch their loved ones be exposed and destroyed. The psychological manipulation was brilliant. The trafficked children would be so devastated by learning the truth about their lives that they would do anything to protect the only families they had ever known, even if it meant betraying their country. December 15, 2025, was exactly 3 weeks away, but Amara had always known something was wrong. It wasn't just the nightmares that came in a foreign language she somehow understood but couldn't speak. It wasn't just the way her parents tensed up whenever she asked about her birth family. It was something deeper, something that lived in her bones. The way she instinctively knew how to arrange flowers in intricate patterns no American child would ever learn. The way certain Arabic music made her cry without understanding why. The way she could taste spices in her dreams that she'd never encountered in her waking life. And most disturbing of all, the way her reflection sometimes looked like a stranger. Everything changed 6 months ago when Amara was organizing her father's study and found a folder labeled Project Sandcastle, Phase 3. Inside were photographs that made her blood run cold. Photos of herself as a 3-year-old, but not the casual family snapshots she was used to seeing. These were surveillance photos, taken from a distance, with timestamps and geographic coordinates that placed them in the royal gardens of Qadar, a small but incredibly wealthy kingdom in the Arabian Peninsula. Photos that were taken 3 days before her adoption. That night, Amara had Googled everything she could find about Qadar in 1999. What she discovered made her hands shake so violently she could barely type. On September 15, 1999, Princess Zahra al-Mansouri, the only daughter of King Khalil al, had vanished from the royal palace during a terrorist attack. She was 3 years old. The attack had been blamed on regional insurgents, and after months of searching, the princess was presumed dead. The girl in those surveillance photos looked exactly like the missing princess. But it was the final document that confirmed Amara's worst fears. A birth certificate for Amy Collins. Dated September 20, 1999, 5 days after Princess Zahra's disappearance. The document was signed by Dr. Harrison Webb, a man whose name appeared on dozens of other documents in her father's office. Documents related to something called International Child Relocation Services. Amara realized she wasn't looking at adoption papers, she was looking at kidnapping receipts. For 6 months, she'd been planning her infiltration of the Chen Corporation, because according to the financial records she'd found, Robert Collins wasn't just her kidnapper, he was an employee. The Chen family had been paying him $50,000 a month for 18 years. Payment for services rendered in something called Project Sandcastle. Now, as Amara cleaned the offices where her captors conducted their business, she was searching for the truth about what had happened to Princess Zahra. What she was finding was so much worse than a simple kidnapping. Last Tuesday, While vacuuming CEO Margaret Chen's office, Amara had found a hidden safe behind a painting. Inside were files on 12 other children, all between the ages of 2 and 5, all from wealthy or politically important families around the world, children who had died in terrorist attacks, natural disasters, or accidents between 1995 and 2003. Children who were now living as the adopted sons and daughters of American billionaires. But these weren't random kidnappings. According to the documents, each child had been specifically selected based on their potential political value. Princess Zahara wasn't just the daughter of a king, she was the sole heir to one of the world's largest oil reserves. The other children were heirs to diamond mines, tech empires, pharmaceutical companies, and political dynasties. The Chen Corporation wasn't running an adoption agency. They were running a hostage operation that had been active for decades. But the most chilling discovery came when Amara found her own psychological profile. Written by Dr. Webb when she was just 7 years old, subject displays excellent adaptation to Western lifestyle, no conscious memory of royal protocols or Arabic language, though subconscious behaviors persist. Recommend continued monitoring and behavioral modification therapy to ensure complete personality integration. Subject shows no signs of questioning her American identity. Project Sandcastle Phase 3 successful, ready for Phase 4 implementation. Phase 4, Amara had been looking for references to Phase 4 for weeks, and last night, she'd finally found it, hidden in a folder marked Long-Term Asset Activation. She discovered the truth about why she and the other kidnapped children had been kept alive all these years. They weren't just hostages, they were sleeper agents. The plan was horrifyingly simple. When these children reached adulthood, they would be reunited with their birth families through carefully orchestrated discoveries of their true identities. They would return to their home countries as long-lost heirs, grateful to the American families who had protected them, and secretly loyal to the interests of their captors. Princess Zahara was supposed to return to Qadir next year, on her 22nd birthday, and eventually inherit the throne, but she wouldn't be ruling for the people of Qadir, she would be ruling for the Chen Corporation and their network of American billionaires who wanted control over Middle Eastern oil reserves. The other kidnapped children were being prepared for similar roles, future presidents, CEOs, and monarchs who would appear to be independent leaders while secretly serving American corporate interests. But here's what terrified Amara the most as she read through those files. The psychological conditioning hadn't completely worked on her. She remembered fragments of her real life. She could still taste the jasmine tea her real mother used to make. She still dreamed in Arabic, which meant she was considered a liability, and according to a memo dated just 2 weeks ago, liabilities in Project Sandcastle were scheduled for permanent relocation. As Amara stood in that empty office at 3 a.m., holding evidence of the most sophisticated kidnapping and brainwashing operation in modern history, she realized she had a choice to make. She could run, try to disappear, and spend the rest of her life hiding from the people who had stolen her childhood. Or she could do something that would change the course of history, because buried in those same files was information about the current political situation in Qadir. King Halil, her real father, was dying. The country was in chaos. Without an heir, the kingdom would likely be absorbed by neighboring countries, and one of the world's largest oil reserves would be up for grabs. But if Princess Zahara returned, if she could prove her identity, she could not only reclaim her throne but expose the network of American corporations that had been stealing children and manipulating global politics for decades. Think about it, in our world today, where international adoption has become big business, where wealthy families can essentially buy children from war-torn countries, how many of those rescued children are actually victims of sophisticated trafficking operations? How many future leaders around the world might be secretly controlled by foreign interests? Amara's story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about the children we see being saved by celebrity adoptions and charitable organizations. What if some of these high-profile rescues aren't rescues at all, but strategic acquisitions of future political assets? And in an era where we're constantly worried about foreign interference in elections and government, what if the most dangerous infiltration isn't happening through spies and hackers, but through stolen children who are being raised to become the leaders of tomorrow? Because Amara was about to discover the most shocking truth of all. She wasn't the only kidnapped royal who had figured out the truth. Around the world, other stolen princes and princesses were waking up to their real identities, and they were planning something that would either liberate them all or get them killed in the process. As Victoria stood in the house where she had grown up, surrounded by photos of family vacations and birthday parties that now felt like elaborate lies, she realized she was facing an impossible choice. She could expose the Blackwood Foundation and destroy the people who had raised her, loved her, and given her everything she thought she wanted in life. But doing so would also expose dozens of other government officials who were unknowing victims of the same trafficking operation. Or she could stay silent, let the activation happen, and watch as America's intelligence community was compromised by people who had been planning this infiltration for over 2 decades. Think about it. In our world today, where international adoption has become more common, where wealthy families routinely adopt children from war-torn countries, how do we know which adoptions are legitimate and which are covers for something more sinister? How many of the people in positions of power around us might have origins they don't even know about? Victoria's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. What if some of the people we trust most, our government officials, our military leaders, our intelligence agents, are compromised not because they chose to be, but because they were designed to be from birth? And in an era where we're constantly worried about foreign interference and domestic security threats, what if the most dangerous infiltration isn't coming from outside our borders, but from children who were stolen from their real families and raised to unknowingly serve foreign interests? Because Victoria was about to uncover the most shocking truth of all. The Blackwood Foundation wasn't an American operation at all. It was being funded and directed by a coalition of foreign governments who had been planning the systematic infiltration of American institutions for over 30 years. And with the activation date just 3 weeks away, Victoria had to decide whether she was going to save the country that had unknowingly been betrayed by its own adoption system, or protect the family that had unknowingly participated in that betrayal. The question wasn't whether Agent Victoria Cross could stop Project Renaissance. The question was whether Anka Popescu could forgive herself for everything she was about to destroy. Dr. Elena Varga looked like she was 45 years old. Yesterday, she had looked like she was 38. Last month, she had looked like she was 25. The problem was, Elena was only 19. She'd been aging at 7 times the normal rate since her 13th birthday, and according to her calculations, she had exactly 43 days left to live, which was why she spent her nights working as a janitor at Varga Industries, the billion-dollar pharmaceutical empire her parents had built specifically to save her life. Or so she thought. For 6 years, Elena had watched her parents pour every resource they had into finding a cure for her condition. Progeria X, they called it, an ultra-rare genetic disorder that caused rapid cellular aging. They'd hired the world's best geneticists, built state-of-the-art research facilities, and spent over $3.2 billion searching for a treatment. Elena had been grateful. How could she not be? Her parents had sacrificed everything for her. They'd turned their pharmaceutical company into a research facility dedicated to saving their daughter's life. They'd worked around the clock, bringing in specialists from every corner of the globe, all in a desperate race against time. But everything changed 3 weeks ago when Elena found something that shattered her entire understanding of her life. She'd been cleaning her father's private laboratory, the one place in the building she'd never been allowed to enter, when she discovered a hidden freezer behind a false wall. Inside were thousands of vials, each labeled with dates going back 20 years. At first, she thought they were experimental treatments, different attempts at finding a cure for her condition. But as she read the labels more carefully, she realized something horrifying. These weren't experimental drugs. They were blood samples. Human blood samples. And they were all labeled with her name and different ages. Elena, age 3. Elena, age 8. Elena, age 11. But Elena had never given blood samples at those ages. Her Progeria X hadn't manifested until she was 13. Confused and terrified, Elena had taken one of the vials and had it analyzed by a friend who worked at an independent lab. The results had come back 2 days later, and they'd changed everything she thought she knew about her life. The blood in the vial wasn't just her blood. It was perfect blood. The cellular structure showed no signs of aging whatsoever. In fact, the cells appeared to be regenerating at an accelerated rate, essentially making the blood eternal. Elena realized she was looking at the cure for aging itself. But if her parents had possessed the cure for aging since she was a child, why was she dying? Why had they spent billions of dollars pretending to search for something they already had? The answer came when Elena broke into her mother's computer and found files labeled Project Chronos. What she discovered there made her question everything about her identity, her condition, and her parents' motives. Alina didn't have progerieks. She had been genetically engineered to age rapidly, but only as a side effect of something far more valuable. Elena's DNA had been modified to produce a protein that could reverse cellular aging in other people. Her blood, her tissue, her very existence was a fountain of youth for anyone who knew how to extract and use it. But here's where it got truly horrifying. Alina wasn't the only one. Hidden in those same files were records of 12 other children, all born between 2000 and 2010. All two parents who owned major pharmaceutical companies, children who had been genetically modified in the womb to produce anti-aging compounds in their blood. Children who had all died of rare genetic disorders by their 20th birthdays. Alina realized she was looking at evidence of the most sophisticated medical conspiracy in human history. Wealthy pharmaceutical executives had been genetically engineering their own children to serve as living anti-aging factories, then harvesting their blood and tissue to create immortality treatments. For the ultra-rich, the children were never meant to survive. They were designed to live just long enough to produce sufficient quantities of the anti-aging compounds, then die before they could discover the truth about their purpose. But Alina had lived longer than expected. Her body was fighting the genetic modifications, which was why her aging had accelerated so dramatically. She was dying not from a genetic disease, but from her body's attempt to reject the artificial modifications that had been made to her DNA. And her parents weren't trying to save her. They were trying to extract as much anti-aging compound from her blood as possible before she died. The cruel irony was devastating. Alina possessed the cure for aging, but she couldn't use it to save herself because her genetic modifications prevented her body from processing the very compounds it was producing. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. As Alina continued digging through the Project Chronos files, she found client lists for the anti-aging treatments that had been developed using blood from children like her. The buyers weren't just wealthy individuals trying to stay young. They were world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, monarchs, and heads of major corporations who had been secretly using these treatments for decades. People who should have died of old age years ago were still in power, still making decisions that affected billions of lives, all because they were consuming products made from the blood of genetically modified children. Alina realized she was looking at evidence of a global gerontocracy, a world secretly ruled by people who should have been dead decades ago, but who were using stolen youth to maintain their grip on power indefinitely. But the most terrifying part of the conspiracy was what Alina found in a folder labeled Phase 2 Implementation. According to the documents, the anti-aging treatments weren't just keeping world leaders alive longer, they were making them dependent on a continuous supply of the compounds. Without regular treatments, the recipients would age decades in a matter of weeks. The pharmaceutical companies weren't just selling immortality, they were selling addiction to immortality. They had created a system where the most powerful people in the world were completely dependent on them for survival. And Alina's parents weren't just participants in this conspiracy, they were the architects. Varga Industries had developed the genetic modification techniques that created children like Alina. They had perfected the extraction and refinement processes that turned children's blood into anti-aging treatments. And they had built the distribution network that supplied these treatments to powerful people around the world. Alina's entire life had been planned from the moment of her conception. She had been designed to live exactly long enough to produce the maximum amount of anti-aging compounds, then die before she could expose the truth. But Alina had discovered something her parents didn't know she knew. There was an antidote. Hidden in her father's most secure files was research showing that the genetic modifications could be reversed, but only using a specific combination of her own anti-aging compounds administered in a precise sequence. The treatment would not only cure her accelerated aging but would also destroy her body's ability to produce the compounds that were keeping world leaders alive. Alina faced an impossible choice: save herself and watch the world's power structure collapse as dozens of leaders suddenly aged to death, or sacrifice herself to maintain the global stability that depended on her blood. Think about it, in our world today, where anti-aging research is advancing rapidly, where billionaires are investing fortunes in longevity treatments, how do we know where these breakthroughs are really coming from? How many of the medical miracles we celebrate might be built on sacrifices we never hear about? Alina's story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about the future of aging and power. What if the people making decisions about our world are operating with lifespans we can't imagine? What if some of today's leaders have been secretly extending their lives using treatments that come at costs we're not allowed to know about? And As we stand on the brink of major breakthroughs in anti-aging technology, how do we ensure that the benefits don't come at the expense of the most vulnerable among us? Because Alina Varga was about to make a decision that would either free her from a life of exploitation or condemn the world to chaos as its secret immortal rulers suddenly faced their own mortality. With 43 days left to live and the power to change everything, Alina had to decide, was one 19-year-old girl's life worth more than the stability of the entire world? The clock was ticking, and time, the one thing Alina had never been allowed to have, was running out. What would you do in Alina's position? Would you save yourself and let the world face the consequences, or would you sacrifice everything to protect a system built on your suffering? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know where you stand on this impossible choice. And if this story has blown your mind like it did mine, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because next week I'm bringing you an even more shocking tale about a tech billionaire who discovered that his AI assistant had been secretly controlling his life decisions for the past 5 years. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Until then, keep questioning everything you think you know about the world around you. Sometimes the truth is darker than we ever imagined.